Hi,
Hi,
I'm William Allgood. I understand that you're interested in our manager's position here
I
at the
am.
restaurant.
I'm Dana
Awesome.
Zarinsky. Good to meet you.
Awesome. Well, I have a couple of questions here. I want to get to know you a little bit more. So, why should I consider hiring you, Dana?
You should consider hiring me because I'm a great worker. I'm outgoing. I do a good job of taking care of my customers and making sure that their priorities are my priorities. And I would really like to work in this type of environment.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear that. What would you say motivates you, Dana?
I am motivated by the desire to do a good job. I really want to put out a good product into the world, and I want to see other people enjoy the things that I do and the things that I find important. And I think the best way to do that is to make sure that I'm putting out great A stuff and making people want to come back for more.
Awesome. Sounds really genuine. What are some of your strengths and weaknesses?
My strengths. I'm a perfectionist. So that can be considered as a strength and I guess a bit of a weakness.
Double-edged sword there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a perfectionist in that I always want to put out the best work possible. I always want to make sure that I put my best foot forward in a professional environment. But at the same time, I guess that can mean that I do things a little bit more slowly.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, if speed is something that is like a primary factor, then maybe it can be not as awesome in a fast-paced environment, but I will always put out the best product possible.
Rather have things done right than quickly.
Absolutely.
Understand. All right. What would you consider to be your greatest personal achievement?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
It's really difficult to quantify your life experiences and try to nail down which one is the best personal achievement.
Well, to make it a little easier, what is the greatest personal achievement that you've experienced in recent memory? What are you the most proud of in, say, the last year?
In the last year, I think in the last year, my greatest personal achievement would be that I've become more comfortable with myself and how I relate to the world, and I think that in so doing that, I come off as like a more outgoing and easily understood person, and I think that goes a long way in a type of environment where you're dealing with public relation a lot.
So you've become a lot more relatable and able to understand others and make connections.
Right.
That's a very good thing. I'm happy for you. What would you consider to be the greatest challenge to you professionally?
Overcoming differences,
Mm-hmm.
and that's exactly what I was talking about
Yeah.
in the past year. That's something that I've come to terms with, and trying to understand others better, trying to make myself more easily understood. It's like a lifelong
Yeah, you're
search,
proud
right?
of the achievement you've made in the area, but you recognize there's still room to grow.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's
And
very
so,
good.
yeah, overcoming differences is a really big factor.
Awesome. Well, we're just blowing through this. Can you describe a time you successfully resolved a conflict with a coworker or customer?
Certainly. Just recently, actually, I have a bit of history in graphic design and art,
Mm-hmm.
and so recently we had a client that came in and they had an idea of what they wanted for the project, but they didn't have any idea of how to like relate that to us.
Mm-hmm.
And so after a few rounds of revisions and a few sketches that we showed to the client, they didn't like any of it. And so, but they couldn't articulate why it was such a problem. So we just worked through it, tried to communicate with them in a different way, show them visual things that they could relate to and pick from those instead of trying to like verbally get from the client what they wanted. And while there were tensions there at the beginning, I believe that we resolved it pretty well by going a different route and trying to find something that worked better for that client.
Well, that's awesome. Typically in the restaurant business, it's usually pretty easy for people to articulate what's wrong with your service. but it's really good to know that you can solve those abstract complaints.
Well, thank you.
It's awesome. Will you describe a time that you led or organized a group that felt successful to you?
Yes. There was a time whenever I was doing some volunteer work, and we were working with children. It was a school function. We were trying to sponsor some Spanish children and go to the schools and actually like have some one-on-one time with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I personally headed up organizing that event and got connected with the school, got connected with my students that were interested in participating,
Mm-hmm.
and we planned out some interesting activities for them, and they were able to understand and play with the adults that came by to visit. And it was a really nice experience.
Awesome. Now, this one can be kind of a difficult question. Have you ever snapped at a manager or ever been really frustrated with an authority figure at work and wanted to lash out? And if so, can you describe a time that you either resisted that impulse or indulged it? And if you indulged it, I would like to know what you learned from that situation.
Okay. I do have a history of working with a very difficult boss.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a difficult person to get along with. He likes to do things his way and doesn't really take feedback in the best possible light.
I
So
understand
he's
that can be
one of those
frustrating,
people that
yeah.
you have to kind of walk on eggshells around sometimes. But so there have been times in the past when I have been frustrated with this person. But if I try to take a step back and recognize where he's coming from and try to work within his parameters, then I find that solutions come more easily instead of just crashing into a china cabinet basically and letting everything fall where it may and crash all over the floor.
Yeah.
Just to try to take a step back, understand where that individual is coming from, and internally resolve the conflict instead of lashing out outwardly. That's the best way that I can think of heading up that situation.
That's a really good way of handling it. We're almost done here. Only two questions left. What do you think makes a good team player? And what qualities do you have that make you a good team player?
I think that it's really important to listen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important to not only listen to what the person is saying, but to try to listen to the things that they're not saying.
Mm-hmm.
And try to work with the person instead of against them. And I think that if you have the ability to listen instead of just the ability to speak, that right there it says volumes for your ability to work within a group. And then also being able to pull your own weight, not just saying, oh yes, I'm listening to what you're saying, but I'm not going to do anything about it.
Of course, you have to participate too.
Yeah. So, yeah, the ability to listen, the ability to get along, and the ability to do the things that are expected of you are probably the top three.
And you would say you're proficient in those areas?
I would say so, yeah.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
And lastly, can you describe a time when you successfully assisted a fellow coworker, or a time when you successfully sought the help of a fellow employee or your manager?
Sure. There was a time that I was working on a project. Again, this is in my graphic design and art experience. And the project was just way too big for me to take on.
Mm-hmm.
We had a deadline that was coming up for this what is it called? Expose, I guess you could call it. And there was a huge display that we were working on, and I was expected to do the work all by myself, and it was just way too much for me to handle. But thankfully, before it got to the point where it was way past due and we couldn't do anything about it and we had to make a bunch of apologies, I asked my coworker to step in, and he helped me source all of the items that we needed while I could more efficiently work on the art aspect of it, and so
Yeah.
I could put out a good product while making sure that all of the little details were taken care of. And so together we actually like did a pretty great job, and we had pictures taken at the event and everything looked beautiful, and it was a good experience.
I would say that's successful, and that you used your ability and knowledge to recognize that you needed some assistance. That's great. I think we have all we need here. I'm sure we'll contact you in a couple of days. Thank you
Excellent.
very much, Dana.
Thanks, good to meet you all.
Thank you.